Hello and welcome to the first in hopefully a series of videos on Tech 1 solo PvP frigate fights and fits. These videos will be primarily aimed at new players to PvP, which I still consider myself to be. This video is a breakdown of the 150mm real Atron fights I posted about a month ago. You can find the link to that video in the description of this one. In this video I will be breaking down the fit and then showing how I fly it with some real-time fights. I'll also be demonstrating some useful features of EFT. I'm pretty new to EFT, which stands for E-Fitting Tool, but have discovered it to be a great out-of-game tool for testing ship fits and sizing them up against potential opponents. Before we get into the fit, let's have a look at the Atron bonuses. We can see here that the Atron has a 10% bonus to small hybrid turret falloff and a 5% bonus to small hybrid turret damage. So a bonus to range and a bonus to damage. So let's go through the fit. In the high slots we have three 150mm Tech 2 railguns. This is where the bonus to range is most evident. Railguns by default have a good range. That, coupled with the Atron's bonus to fall off and a good skill base, allows these guns to apply damage from a long distance. In my case, you can see I have an optimal range of within 17 kilometers and a fall off range within 28 kilometers. That's pretty good. With the Atron's 5% bonus to small hybrid turret damage, I'm getting 118 DPS cold and 139 DPS overheated out of these guns. Not a huge amount, but fair enough. The aim of this particular fit is to fight your opponent at a range where their incoming damage is significantly reduced while yours is not. In the case of this fit, that's mostly between 10 and 12 kilometers. Looking at the mid slots, we have a 1 mega neutron afterburner 2, a warp disruptor, or long point as it's commonly known, and a Webifier. The Atron is one of the fastest Tech 1 frigates in the game, and by using the Tech 2 afterburner we're able to get into and control our optimal range quickly and effectively. In addition, overheated, this AB will let me reach 1700 kilometers per second, which when combined with the Webifier means that I can hold down some micro warp drive ships long enough to collect that kill mail, or if the shit is hitting the fan I can bug out of the fight with some ease. The long point disruptor is fitted here because the majority of the times you will be fighting outside the range of warp scramblers. With a 20 kilometer range, the long point allows you to remain at your optimal while holding down the target. The Webifier works in combination with your afterburner, slowing your target ship down, allowing you to get into and maintain your optimal engagement range quickly. In the low slots, we have a magnetic field stabilizer which increases our DPS, damage control unit, and a small ancillary armor ripper. In the rig slots we have a small ancillary current router. This provides us with an extra 10% to the power grid, which is needed as this fit is quite tight. We also have a small hybrid collision accelerator for some extra DPS, and in the last slot a polycarbon engine housing to give a little boost to our speed. So that's the fit. The aim is to fight your opponent at a range where their incoming damage is significantly reduced while yours is not. In the case of this fit, that is usually between 10 and 12 kilometers. There are exceptions. For example, if you're chasing down a micro warp drive kite fit, applying a keep at range command in this instance is going to let the MWD kiter move beyond your reach. What you need to do in that case is chase them down. Before I go into some fights, let me show you this fit in EFT to demonstrate its ability against a few sample fights. EFT, which stands for E-Fitting Tool, is a great out-of-game tool for testing ship fits and sizing them up against potential opponents. So here's the Atron fit in EFT. As you can see, it's quite a tight one. With my current skills, it uses up every ounce of available CPU, and as I mentioned before, the small ancillary current router rig is required to give me enough power grid. If I remove the current router here, and even with all 5 skills, I am still over power grid. So that little rig is pretty important. Let's put it back in. One of the most useful functions in EFT is the DPS graph and projected effects. The DPS graph will display your DPS versus the DPS of your target at varying ranges. The first fight you will see in this video is against a real incursus, and I have imported that fit into EFT here. Let's overheat our guns. Okay, so if I click File, New DPS Graph, in the white box to the right here, if we right click and select Add Attacker and choose the setup of your choice, in this case it's going to be my 150 mil Atron, and then do the same for the target, which will be the real incursus. There we go. Right click on the graph at the range you want to be engaging your target at. I'm going to choose 10 kilometers. You can see that my DPS at 10 kilometers is 139. Now let's swap around and make the incursus the attacker and the Atron the target. This will allow me to see the DPS of the incursus at the same range. While the incursus is also using rails, it does not have a range bonus like the Atron. Its DPS at 10 kilometers is only 95. Now let's try that at 12. The incursus DPS drops to 59, and when we swap over we see the Atron DPS is sitting at 128. So at 12 kilometers my Atron is doing 128 DPS overheated, and the incursus is only doing 59. Something else to notice is our speed. My speed is greater than the incursus, so I've got 1308 meters per second here, with the incursus doing 1020 meters per second. So with the Atron we will have no trouble maintaining our range in this fight. Let's take a look at that fight. The target warps into a plex I'm sitting at. I immediately select him in the overview and start spamming keep at range. When I see my ship beginning to move, I lock him up. It doesn't take me long to reach my optimal thanks to the speed of the Atron, and I'm now in control of the fight. Notice the damage notifications scrolling up the screen. His damage output is lower than mine. The majority of his hits are just grazes. I think he tries to run in the end, but my long point, overheated web and afterburner make sure he is held until the end. Good fight. Let's go back to EFT and have a look at another matchup. This time it's an MWD micro warp drive Tristan drone boat, a very common fit in low-sec PvP and faction warfare. In the following fight I take on one of these while sitting in a faction warfare plex. The first thing to note is his speed is much greater than mine. He's doing 3000 meters per second to my 1300. This is where the projected effects option in EFT comes in handy. It's where you can see the effects of any remote modules you want to apply to the ships and fits you're comparing. I want to see what happens if I apply my Webifier to this target and overheat my afterburner. Will I be able to catch him, or at least keep up with him to get the kill? Click the Projected Effects tab at the bottom of the Tristan fit. Drag the Fleeting Propulsion Webifier from your Atron fit to the Projected Effects window of the Tristan. Now let's look at his speed. It has brought down his speed from 3000 meters per second to 1204 kilometers per second. From this I know that if I'm fast enough at locking him and applying the web, I can at least match his speed and not let him pull away from me. Let's look at it in action. So the Tristan warps in and I start spamming the approach button. I have my web overheated to make sure I can keep him slowed for as long as possible. Watch his speed. He reaches 2 kilometers per second before my web kicks in. Also, I had accidentally double-clicked my web at the beginning of this fight, which turns it off again after one cycle. His speed shoots up to almost 3000 kilometers per second when my web is off, but luckily I noticed this and got it on again ASAP, which brings his speed back to a more manageable level. All the while, I'm just constantly on approach, hoping to keep him within range of my guns. The base speed of the Atron combined with my overheated afterburner is helping a lot here. In the end, he's unable to pull enough range to avoid my guns. The flip side to this approach is that your assumptions that you will be fighting a kitey Tristan are completely wrong. So I see this Tristan on D-scan and assume he's another MWD drone boat. I set up in the usual way, sticking close to the Plex beacon, where every ship warps to when they enter a faction warfare Plex, and when he warps in, I spam approach. But this is no drone boat. It turns out he was a neuting Tristan. When I realise this, I start spamming my keep at range in an attempt to pull away. I manage this, but he has pretty much capped me out. My web turns off, and then as I move outside my default keep at range, my ship turns back towards him. He's able to burn right back into me and apply the last bit of neuting pressure to cap me out completely. In hindsight, I should have just bugged out when his point dropped, or kept burning away from him to try and escape. The fact that I turned back in towards him and he was able to catch me again sealed my fate. This next fight is with a Binford Executioner. These guys can hit hard if in their optimal range, so it's vital I pull away from him. Once again I'm spamming that keep at range button. I should have started this fight further out than 4 kilometers, and his first few volleys take me into armor, but I'm faster than he is and soon pull range. I almost lose this fight because I forgot I turned my ancillary repper off momentarily and just managed to turn it on again in time. Next up is a great fight with a Condor. When fighting Condors, I mostly assume they are kite fit with optimal range disruptors fitted. So my thought process here is that I need to get on top of him fast and get my web on him. It turned out he was dual prop with rockets, but the approach method was essential in this fight. You will see him pulling range near the end of the fight, obviously having turned on his MWD, but with my overheated afterburner, web and good range on my guns, I was able to keep him on grid long enough to get the kill. In this next fight, I'm up against a dual web blaster Merlin. Now dual webs are going to be a problem for me, as once I'm caught, my opponent will have no trouble catching up with me and blasters pack a punch. However, blasters have a much shorter range than rails, So my plan here is to begin the fight at my optimal range and start applying damage well before he catches up to me. Notice how by the time he has got his guns within range, I have already got him into structure. It still works out to a close fight due to the sheer DPS of his blasters though. If it was me warping in on this Merlin, the outcome would have been very different. I happen to know my opponent quite well, and he returns in a dual web railgun fit. Now with rails fitted, he is going to be able to apply damage at a significantly greater range, and he is going to be able to pin me down with his dual webs. You can see he starts hitting me from 12 kilometers out. My range here gets screwed up as my ship turns to approach him, and I die in this fight. I still think I could have won, and I wouldn't hesitate to take on another rail Merlin. The Merlin has no range bonus, and providing I don't get webbed and screw up my range, my Atron is faster. If I had kept the distance at say 15 kilometers between us, I would have been doing more DPS and would be avoiding his webs. We can see that in EFT. Here's the DPS graphs of the real Merlin versus the real Atron. At 12 kilometers apart, he is doing 104 DPS to my 128, a difference of 24. He'll also have me dual webbed, so we'll be constantly closing this gap. If we look at a 15k separation, my DPS has dropped to 100, while his DPS is 61, a difference of 39 DPS. He will also be outside of web range, meaning I should be able to maintain that distance in theory. I just need to find another dual web rail Merlin to practice on. Here's a fight against the dual web breacher. In much the same way as the dual web blaster Merlin, once I'm caught, he will have no trouble closing range, but before that happens, my aim is to inflict as much damage beforehand. The breacher does not get a bonus to rocket range. For the first half of this fight, his rockets aren't even reaching me. Another breacher. This time a dual rep fitted with a medium ancillary shield booster and a small ancillary armor wrapper. Again, I'm starting the fight outside of his rocket range. You can see his rockets incoming but never actually reaching me. Unfortunately, being the newbie I am, I screwed up my module management and burnt out my web and afterburner here. I'm not sure I could have out DPS'd his tank, but the fight was going pretty much in my favour until my web and afterburner burnt out. He catches me and orbits me tight, completely wrecking the tracking on my railguns. Great fight. For the final two fights in this video, I want to show you how much fun this little ship can be, catching your opponents off guard and even taking on ships that typically outclass you. A Navy Comet had been chasing me around this system. After a bit of research via Zkill, I learned that he is most likely in an afterburner blaster fit. I have seen Atrons kill Navy Comets before, and I thought I'd try my luck here. With him being blaster fit, my plan was to start the fight outside the range of his guns. fight is close and the Atron is holding its own when about halfway through he decides to bail. I was so focused on managing my armor repper I didn't notice, and by the time I had, he had pulled range from my web. I was derping around at this point. I should have been overheating my afterburner and long point. He escapes just as I burn out my guns. He'd have won the fight if he'd stuck around. But I like to believe he freaked as he witnessed how much hurt this little mosquito was dealing. If I was doing this fight over again, I would set my keep it range to 10 kilometers and not 12. This range would have still negated his blaster damage and given me a little wiggle room with my web. I spotted a lone catalyst in a faction warfare plex. Could I take a catalyst? Again, a little Z-kill research told me that he was most probably blaster fit. He had friends in local too, so I was going to need to stay alert. I hadn't tried something like this before, and those blaster catalysts can pump out some serious DPS. But I decided to have a go. Well, that went well. I think I caught him by complete surprise, to be honest. He didn't even get a shot off. I was lucky here, perhaps, but the theory still stands. If I can outrange his guns, I have a good chance of beating a blaster catalyst. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. With a little luck, it will introduce you to the exciting world of EVE PvP, something I'm still learning about myself. Please give it a like if you like, and subscribe to my channel for future videos in the series. Thanks for watching.